Okay, let's get started. Okay, so sound and video is okay, I think, by the looks of it. Yep, okay, great. So, well, thanks everybody for coming along today in your various time zones. We really appreciate it. Bit of housekeeping to start off with. So a number of our interest group members here on the call today are Australian, and we come from a variety of different areas in Australia. So therefore, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of our interest group, the First Nations people of Australia, who have been traditional custodians of the country on which we're gathered throughout Australia, and the First Nations people's connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So I myself am coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who have been custodians of this land for many thousands of years. The University of Melbourne, where I'm employed, is situated on the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Boonwurrung, the Dja Dja Wurrung and the Yorta Yorta Nation, and the Wadawurrung people. I acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we recognise that different countries and different regions have different ways of acknowledging traditional custodians, and that there may be Australians on this call who are coming from other country. And so I'd invite you to please share your acknowledgement and recognition in the chat. Okay, so I'd like to thank the RDA and the organisers of RDA 17 for putting this plenary together. The interest group members who have developed this session, as well as Stephanie and Frankie from the Secretariat and the TAB respectively, for their invaluable feedback in the formation of this group. And of course, I'd like to thank everybody in attendance here today. So you can see our session outline for today on the program site. I'll just pop that into chat now. Okay. Yeah, and here is a link to our shared notes for the session today, and we'll keep posting that periodically throughout the session. So in this document, the Google Doc, you'll find some useful links, so please feel free to explore these and also to add to these if you have other relevant resources. These are collaborative notes, so please do feel free to add to the notes. The more notes, the better. And also do add your name into the document and your contact details as well if you'd like to continue to be part of what we're doing here. So we'll be aiming to stay to schedule. So I'll jump in and stop people if we're running over time. So sorry, but we've got a lot of information to fit into just an hour and a half. Alex is going to be opening the session with an introduction to the group and how we came to be. Then we'll have some lightning talks, and then the rest of the session is really going to be about participation and discussion. So do feel free to participate however you're comfortable. So use the chat, the audio, video, whatever works best for you. There's no expectations. Just do what's best for you. And don't forget to please mute when you're not talking, otherwise we're going to get some feedback. And last thing before I hand over to Alex, we also have a poster session as well. Here is a link to that poster session. You can also find that in the Google Doc. Do feel free to jump over to that during the session break. Can you still hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. All right, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to hand over to Alex. And if we all turn off our cameras, that'll make Alex's slide bigger when she shares.
Thank you, Crystal. All right, can you see that? Is that all right?
Perfect.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, thanks Crystal for that, and welcome everybody. Good evening and good morning, depending on where you are, and thanks for joining the first meeting of the Sensitive Data Interest Group, which we hope may soon be ratified. So in November last year at RDA 16, members of our group organised a Birds of a Feather session titled Optimising Sensitive Data for Research. Our purpose was to share ideas about working with sensitive data and to discuss and develop these with our RDA community. Specifically, we wanted to highlight the diversity of sensitive data and to identify gaps and resources for working with sensitive data. And in so doing, our intention was to provide a platform to develop a further understanding of how data can be sensitive in different contexts, how to manage sensitive data across data types and disciplines, and the challenges of sharing data in and across different domains. So following the Birds of a Feather, a group of us volunteered to be co-chairs of a potential interest group, and I introduce us to you now. So we are Dharma Ackman from the University of Michigan, Nicola Burton from the Australian Research Data Commons, Roman David from the European Research Infrastructure on Highly Pathogenic Agents, Stephen McKinnon from the Australian Data Archive, Rita Silva from the Instituto Português Oncologia do Porto Francisco Gentil, I hope I said that right, Rita, and the University of Porto, and finally Crystal Spreadborough, Priyanka Pillai and myself from the University of Melbourne. And on our panel today and our new co-chair, we have Amy Pienta from the University of Michigan, and it's great to have you on board, Amy. So we have also been guided and supported in our endeavours by Stephanie Cathers from the Australian Research Data Commons and RDA, Keith Russell from the Australian Research Data Commons, and Frankie Stevens from Australia's Academic Research Network and RDA. And many thanks to you, Stephanie, Keith, and Frankie. So we've been meeting regularly since RDA 16, and broadly, our aims are promoting the FAIR principles, focusing on the unique risks associated with sensitive data and exploring strategies to minimise such risks. Our aims for today are to discuss the draft charter we have to foster engagement with our RDA colleagues from all around the world in existing RDA groups and networks, and also those that join us for the first time, and to identify key objectives that we will work towards. And before we focus on the charter, we will have 3 lightning talks, so stay tuned for those. Okay, so on the slide here, you can see a working definition for what we understand sensitive data to be, but this is a working definition, so we definitely invite your feedback on this. So sharing sensitive data of high quality is vital to assess and compare research results and to leverage data to its fullest capacity. However, as sensitive data is increasingly used for research purposes, finding strategies to mitigate risks and harms is becoming particularly crucial. Sensitive data spans a wide range of disciplines, contexts, and stakeholder groups, and this interest group will bring together people from diverse backgrounds to develop a shared understanding, language and resources, and to advance the conversation about the use and reuse of sensitive data. So I'm now going to give you a very brief overview of our charter, which has previously been shared on the RDA website, and I think the link might be in the chat, but it's also in our document for today, and this is what we'll return to in the second half of our session. So we expect that the RDA community will raise a variety of issues for this group to address as the interest group develops, and so themes might include: how do we assess the level of data sensitivity across different contexts and disciplines? What are the risks associated in various ways? What guidance can we offer to researchers? How do we balance sharing and reuse with cultural and ethical considerations? And how do different consent models affect primary and secondary use of sensitive data? So our interest group will be informed by the community, and the following objectives are our starting point. We wish to develop a shared understanding and refined definition of sensitive data. We wish to define various levels of sensitivity for data, and we want to develop tools to assess such sensitivity. We want to develop an understanding of how sensitivity relates to openness, and we want to identify consent models. Further, we wish to identify types of sensitive data holdings and the resources across various domains, and to identify existing data definitions and standards for different types of sensitive data. There's also some other objectives listed here. I won't read through all of them, so we're working towards many goals, objectives, and these are listed here. So in order to meet these objectives, we intend to identify key expectations of the community. We wish to examine different types of data across disciplines. We wish to identify best practices in the management of sensitive data. We wish to engage with relevant RDA interest groups, working groups, and communities of practice. And that's something that we're quite committed to. We wish to gather common guidelines and recommendations and to catalogue ethical, philosophical and cultural principles that underpin our use of assets such as sensitive data. We also have a range of further activities planned in order to develop our community, and I invite you to refer to our charter draft if you haven't looked at it already. We would love your comments on what we have prepared, and I should note too that we have had some really helpful feedback already, and we will be returning to this in detail following the plenary and when we launch into the next phase of our charter preparation. And it would be great if each of you also reviewed this document and provided us with feedback. Come on board. And finally, our most immediate tasks are workshopping and refining our definition of sensitive data and working towards being endorsed as an interest group by the RDA. Our aim is to provide a forum. Our aim is to provide a forum for a range of communities to share their requirements and jointly develop strategies, support, recommendations and guidelines relevant to the use of sensitive data. So we will define common goals around how best to address the risks associated and how to responsibly disseminate, aggregate and use pre-existing heterogeneous sensitive data at a global scale. And finally, we are keen to expand our numbers and we'd love you to come on board working with us on the sensitive data interest group. Thanks so much, and I'm going to hand over back to Crystal now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. We have a couple of minutes if anyone had any questions at this point, just any short questions. Do also please take advantage of the Q&A function. Pop your questions in there at any time and vote on them. Okay. Yeah, so Raman is ready to go. So we're going to move now into the lightning talk section of our session. So this lightning talk speakers will speak for about 5 minutes. Then we'll have roughly 3 minutes for any burning questions. But the series of lightning talks will be followed by 10 minutes of Q&A as well. So if you don't get your question asked during the 3 minutes, it's okay. There's another opportunity, and again, please do take advantage of the Q&A. So I'll hand over to Raman now.
Okay, can you see my screen? Yes, great. I will turn off my camera because I don't have a really great connection, but I'm here. So my presentation is to try to have an overview, a quick overview on what are sensitive data, and it's different between disciplinaries, but there are international definitions in some case that I would like to provide. So I am working in a biocontainment laboratory. They are called the BSL-4. It's the highest level of containment that we can have, and we deal with things like Ebola, Nipah, Marburg, etc. This kind of biocontainment laboratory needs to increase personnel and information security, and are nationally and internationally regulated. So what are the main type of sensitive data? 4 points are to be considered with the possible community risk. The first one is economical risk with the concurrence on between countries or between industries. The second one is interference with security program and tools. The third one is a misappropriation of knowledge and data for instance, to build a weapon. And the fourth one is the terrorism. When you have a plan or an access to an hospital or a stadium, for example, it could be misused. Evidently, obviously, you have environmental sensitive data on biodiversity and so on, and the endangering, coveted and scarce resource, including relocalizable data. And you have obviously personal data. I will not detail this time. So in all laboratories, we have different kind of informations from building information with equipment location, IT network control equipment, type of decontamination, personal data, inventory of quantity, quality, and location of pathogens stored in laboratory, procedure and scientific methods, and data and results. And all the three first data are could compromise national security data and should never be required to share in an open access manner. So for BSL3 and BSL4, we have this kind of possibility of misuse of data. In life science, the dual use research of concern is based on current understanding that can be reasonably anticipated to provide knowledge, information, product, or technology that could be directly misapplied to pose a significant threat with broad potential consequences to public health and safety, agricultural crops and other plants, animals, the environment, material, or national security. So the type of research that may trigger the concern is from a WHO informational consultation on dual use research concern, is for instance to demonstrate how to render a vaccine ineffective or enhance the harmful consequence of a pathogen or toxin or render a non-pathogen virulent, increase the transmissibility of a pathogen after the host range of a pathogen or toxin, enable evasion of diagnostic or detection modalities, enhance the susceptibility of a host population to a pathogen or toxin, generate or reconstitute certain eradicated or extinct pathogen or toxin, or enable weaponization of a biological agent or toxin. But we have some examples of dirt data dissemination in paper, for instance, demonstrate how to render a vaccine ineffective, increase the transmissibility of a pathogen, enhance the harmful consequence of a pathogen or toxin or render non-pathogen virulent, confer resistance to antibiotic, antiviral agent, or antitoxin, and it generates or reconstitutes certain eradicated or extinct pathogen or toxin, and enable weaponization of a biological agent or toxin. So dirt data are not bad data, but scientific advances are necessary for development of vaccine, therapeutic diagnostic, and to further scientific knowledge. And we have seen that in the COVID-19 crisis, it was really critical. So we have to manage a balance between national and international security and scientific advancement. If you have questions, do not hesitate.
Thanks, Ramon. That was great. There's been a bit of chatter in the chat about natural hazards, earthquakes, and whatnot. Isabel, did you want to ask a question around that? No trouble if not.
Isabel is working with Irina.
Just a nice joke to animate a little bit. Because you had classified some risk, but there are plenty, I think.
Yes, sure.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that, Ramon. And again, if you have any questions that come up, please just pop them in the Q&A function. Okay, so next, Rita is going to speak to us. She's going to give us case studies, setting up the sensitive data project. Rita, I will turn my camera off and I'll start sharing your slides. We may have momentarily lost Rita. That's okay. We might jump forward in that case to Amy, if you're around. Oh, you're here, Rita. Okay. Yeah, nice. Okay. I'll start sharing your slides.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I don't know. Okay, so hello, my name is Rita Silva, and I will present my experience in setting up a project using sensitive data, more specifically health data from cancer patients. But before that, let me introduce myself. I received my MD from the Institute of Biomedical Science, Abel Salazar, a medical school from University of Porto. And in 2011, I started working at the Portuguese Institute of Oncology of Porto as a resident doctor of clinical hematology. 3 years later, I interrupted my residency to do a PhD at University of Minho, which I finished in 2019. So now I'm back to EPO Porto, where I diagnose, treat, and follow patients. With blood malignancies. And I want to apply the research skills that I developed during my PhD to new projects involving health data. And as you can see on the top, I love to climb and do outdoor activities. And so EPO Porto is a national and international reference health institution in oncological treatment, research, and education. Since its opening in 1974, it has become a leading institution in treating patients with cancer. EPO Porto admits about 10,000 new patients per year, currently providing healthcare to more than 45,000 patients. It has the largest bone marrow transplant unit and the largest radio-oncology radiosurgery unit in the Southwest Europe. And in 2019, EPO Porto was certified for implementing treatment with CAR T cells under an early access program. Despite EPO Porto excellency in patients' care and its strong enforcement in research, doctors and researchers, as it happens everywhere around the world, spend a lot of time finding and collecting the data they need. The majority of health data is not used for research purposes because it is sensitive data and it belongs to the patients, and its primary purpose is to be used in clinical practice. The use of health data in research, with few exceptions, needs to be authorized by the patients through an informed consent and needs to ensure data privacy, confidentiality, and safety. With the General Data Protection Regulation and other legislations, collaborations with researchers from other institutions became more difficult. So in 2019, I started looking for a solution. And it was then that I found RDA, Odyssey, and many other organizations and initiatives that inspired me to write the AMILE project. So AMILE it's a project that aims to apply text mining tools to clinical records of patients with acute myeloid leukemia. As most clinical records are composed by free text fields instead of structured data formats, we want to create and validate text mining algorithms to extract clinical data from medical summaries and clinical reports in a reliable, safe, and confidential way, transforming them into structured format data that will allow automatic collection. AMILE received a positive opinion from the next slide, Crystal. Okay. Amal received a positive opinion from the data protection officer and is already authorized by the local ethics committee. For that, we made sure to implement all the basic measures for data privacy and security, including the encryption of the disk of where the data will be saved, no data transfer to third-party services such as cloud services, authentication processes, authorizations to access to data, collection of the minimum of personal data, the identification and anonymization of data, and the security in data storage, and we also define an end of data use. Regarding the ethical issues, the project is compliant to Gdpr and was submitted to a data protection impact assessment. We won't collect informed consents, so this project is included in those few exceptions that I mentioned before. And there is different reasons for not collecting the informed consents. First, most patients with acute myeloid leukemia whose data will be used had passed away. And the purpose is very specific and is clearly defined, and the data processing is necessary for the performance of the project tests, which will be carried out in the public interest. With the help of a data steward, Julia Karimova from Inestec, we wrote the data management plan in which we included the measures for data privacy and security. Actually, that data management plan that we will see in the next slide, it is available on Zenodo for all of those who want to read it and use it. It's open access. Right now, we are collecting the PDF files that include the hospital discharge summaries and other clinical reports. And the next slide, please. So we are collecting those PDF files to extract the text data and then process it and turn it into the structured data to be included in a validated encrypted database. Simultaneously, there is another project which I will not talk a lot today, but it's called PC Extra Health, and it's being written, and it aims to create an automatic process to collect health data from all patients in my department when their cases are presented in the multidisciplinary group meetings. So that's all I wanted to share with you. Thank you for your attention, and please feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much, Rita. That was excellent. We have a couple of minutes if anyone had any burning questions. I see there's some lively discussion happening in the Q&A, which perhaps we'll leave to after the lightning talks. It looks very interesting. Yeah.
Crystal, there is a couple of questions in the Q&A that perhaps specific for Rita that we might pick up.
Irrelevant. Okay, no worries. Did you have any specific ones, Steve, there? I see you've been responding to some.
There are a couple of questions about sort of patient consultation and things.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Simon has asked if I discussed the project with patients. I guess the question is for me. Okay. So no, until now I did not discuss this with patients. I present. So the project was written with with many collaborators from the hospital, including the director of my department and other doctors. We did not discuss it with patients as it's all what we want is to establish a protocol, and we started with this group of patients that suffered from acute myeloid leukemia, as I said, most of them had passed away. So it's for now we didn't include their perspective in the project, but when we start collecting the data, I believe it would be very useful and important to share our results and ask for feedback from their feedback. Yeah, thank you for the question.
I'm on mute. Of course I am. Very.
I was guessing at what you were saying.
Yeah, well done. Very good. Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Amy. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Okay. Great. I'm here from ICPSR, which is a domain repository serving the social sciences. And I've been asked to talk about some of the lessons learned from the sharing end of the data, like Rita talked about. ICPSR, because it is a social science domain repository, has a lot of experience with sensitive data, given most of our data are coming from people with lots of details about people's lives. Specifically, the experience that I'm drawing on, just to make a few comments today, come from my experience directing the National Addiction and HIV Data Archive program. NADAP, as we call it, is a topical archive that's funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So we are sharing HIV and addiction data funded mainly by grantees of NIDA and also other addiction and HIV data sets from that domain that would be of interest to this community of researchers. NIDA itself is one of the institutes that is part of the National Institutes of Health. So this is a long-running project, and so we have a lot of accumulated experience working with the kinds of sensitive data sets that I'll talk about today. It was funded back in 2009. So we've been doing this for a fair bit, but a lot of the really interesting things have happened in the last few years, which I'll get to. We provide infrastructure that helps grantees share their sensitive data. So we're, of course, a repository working with people to deposit data into the repository, but then also the sharing bit on the other end, helping users connect to the data sets. The thing that I wanted to stress is that sensitive data in the social sciences can generally be shared, or often can be shared, and that there are many benefits of doing doing so that outweigh the risks. Of course, leveraging the data for a greater purpose. Some of the most innovative research can come when others are allowed to use the data and for secondary analysis or for combining with other data sets, for bringing external data resources to bear and combine with that data. So all those things become possible when data are shared. The other point to make, we talk to patient advocates, we talk to study participants. There's been studies of research participants that suggest that research participants really do want their data shared, especially when their privacy can be maintained. And so it's a really lofty and giving back goal of a repository to be able to facilitate that use of the data that goes back to why research participants generally got involved in research in the first place. And the other point to mention is that sensitive data generally or oftentimes can be de-identified to the point where the data are still usable and can be shared in a pretty straightforward manner. That's not always possible, and sometimes there's additional security and restrictions around the data that have to be in place. But for all of the data sets that we have in the NADAP archive, many of them have very sensitive information like the HIV status of patients and participants in studies. Yet we can make those microdata generally available when we can do the de-identification on the attributes of the people that would disclose them. So we can share HIV status oftentimes. So to that end, we have lots of public use data sets containing sensitive data, like I said, HIV status, drug use, that are just simply downloadable and don't require IRB approval or oversight for users to use the data, is how we approach that. And that generally people are just agreeing to general terms of use. But then we also do have restricted data sets where the indirect identifiers remain in the data, in part because they have analytic value. And then the data are not downloadable. The documentation may be, but there are other requirements such as IRB approval and of course a data use agreement and a security environment to protect the data either at the user's institution or where we reside at the University of Michigan. We keep the data there and people connect. So the example that I wanted to talk about from NADAP is the population assessment of tobacco and health. And this is a study that we have been disseminating for a number of years. It is a federally produced data set. So the producer of these data are the National Institutes of Health, jointly with the Food and Drug Administration. It was launched in 2011 when the first wave of data were collected. The first wave of data were collected in 2013, and there's annual data collections, and so lots of data spooling out from this the study at this point. The PATH study is interesting because it's one of the first tobacco projects that NIH and FDA worked on together, in part to answer questions that come from what happened in the US in 2009, which is the Tobacco Regulatory Act, which for the first time gave the FDA the ability to regulate tobacco products. And so as part of their need to be able to regulate tobacco products in the US, they needed good data about behaviors to be able to do so. So that's where the PATH comes from. And that's kind of interesting to the sensitivity issue here. So what makes PATH sensitive is in part, there's tremendous political and tobacco industry interest in the data and what kinds of conclusions are drawn from these data. The tobacco industry has big and deep pockets, and they care very much about the research that gets done. And at the same time, these data sets are, pretty disclosive and contain other sensitivities. So there's a lot to that as well. It's not just a large scale social survey. It also is a survey, or it's also a study that's collecting biomarkers and interesting outcomes about the implications of tobacco use on lots of different populations in the US. There's a lot of breadth and depth of information on tobacco use, and not just from adults, but from kids. So that makes it sensitive. And then complicating that, of course, is that parents and children are both in the study. And so we always take extra care when parents could potentially identify the behaviors of their children. So when NIDA approached us, we'd already had the NADAP archive for a while about disseminating the data. They asked for many things to be placed around the data to make sure that these sensitive data could be secure. So to that end, we began to operate our archive under the security controls of a FSMA moderate secure enclave in order to hold the PATH data. And so that has been a multi-year kind of process to get that certification and an authority to operate technically, and then we maintain those controls over time. To get the data out quickly, because FDA and NIH know that people want these data, they do very quick releases of the data, and so the schedule is very important for these data because lots of people are clamoring for it on all sides of the tobacco question of whether tobacco is good or it's not so dangerous, which is kind of interesting. So we make the data, those restrictive releases that don't have as much disclosure mitigation done, available in a virtual data enclave. We make those data available. The other thing that's important to the funders and the data providers in this question are that the data can not just go to the research community, but also to industry analysts. Because they recognize that, in fairness, everyone should have access to the data if they can use the data ethically. So this is my last slide, that sometimes the unexpected still happens, even when we do our best to keep the data safe. In part, I think because of the intense public scrutiny around not just the data, but the results of the data, analysts are always scrambling to do the science fast and do the science in a way that it gets out and released as fast as possible. And we've had breaches on these data. There was a pretty early on a data breach that we've classified as intentional in the sense that they knew our rules, but they worked around them and breached the virtual data enclave. But the interesting thing here to mention is that the breach led us to take a look at what we could do better to make sure that people had all of the rules and knowledge about how to use the data up front and center. We issued a training for all of our VDE users, not just for the PATH data, but other data sets in the archive as well. And this training about what you should and shouldn't do with the data then surfaced instances of teams that unintentionally had broken some of our virtual data enclave rules. And so the final point that I wanted to make here is that so then we had lots of data violations that were being reported to us, and we worked with teams to address those issues. But the training and then the string of breaches also sensitized, I think, our staff, our archive staff who work with users to noticing and reporting even minor protocol violations that are somewhat frequent, I think, probably across a lot of the enclaves like ICPSR runs for using data where, teams have, minor breaches of what we ask them to do. They're not, breaching the data, but they are doing things like talking about the rules of using the data and things like that. So it's been kind of an interesting outcome. And that was it. Perfect timing, Crystal.
It's like we rehearsed it, Amy. And this time I'm not muted. That was fantastic. Thanks so much, Amy. There's a lot of lively discussion happening in the chat around consent. But before we go on to that, there is a specific question about the breaches that you just mentioned, Amy, from Paul. What were the ramifications of the data breach? I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, Paul, or if you're happy for Amy to jump in.
Yeah, we generally, the first course of action is to lock down the data and to try to stop the data from going out further. So however they are, if they're if they've left our environment and they're being held in outside of our virtual data enclave, we make sure that the person knows to not let them go further. The second step then is working with the person who's breached the data to clean the data up in a way that we agree that it has been cleared. We always do retraining and a sort of cooling off period for the user so that they can regroup and go back into the enclave with clear understanding of what actions they did that were wrong and how they can correct that and not have that happen again in the future. And I don't think we've had any instances of repeat breaches, like repeat breachers, I should say, or security incidents, I guess I should call them, because not all of them are data breaches. Some, like I said, are just protocol.
That's great. Thanks, Amy. Yeah. Were there any complaints Paul follows up with?
Are there any complaints? Anytime that these things are happening, we're working with not just the researcher who might have had a problem, following our policy, but we're working with the institutional representatives and sometimes the lawyers, both at the University of Michigan and where the user sits. So I would say that there are often protracted legal discussions about, whose obligations, are some of our decisions around access to the data agreeable to the institution that signed the data use agreement and things like that. So yeah, generally yes, without going into specifics.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. And I think that touches on the other theme that is sort of coming through in the questions about participant expectations or stakeholder expectations, this time around consent. And there's been a bit of discussion about consent from participants, well, from data from people who have since passed away. Obviously, Rita, if you want to jump in and speak to those questions at all. And I'm aware we have other people on the call who have experience in health data. So if anyone else wants to jump in and speak to that.
Okay, so one of the questions was if in the project, in the AMAL project, we shouldn't collect an informed consent from the closest relative of the patients that had died. In our case, it is not mandatory to collect informed consent because we will use the minimal data from the patient and everyone that will be using that data has already access. In this case, I'm the principal investigator, and I am a physician, a medical doctor in the oncohematology department. So I have access to all the data that will be processed. Every week we discussed all the patients in the department with all the doctors. So I'm not being given any privileges or any unauthorized access to data, and I'll be the one doing the identification and anonymization. So all the collaborators that right now do not have access to the data won't be able to access it. So we believe that the interests and rights of the patients that will be included will not be will be respected. So in this case, and we may discuss if we comply to the Declaration of Helsinki, because in the Declaration of Helsinki, it's written that, let me cite it. While the primary purpose of medical research is to generate new knowledge, this goal cannot never take precedence over the rights and interests of individual research subjects. And in this case, we consider that we are not taking any precedence over the rights and interests of the patients, because there won't be any difference in the privacy and confidentiality. Only we will only use the sensitive data to be processed, and then we will delete it from all the backups and of the project. So
that's great. Thanks so much for that additional context. And there's a lot of lively discussion about consent more broadly as well, which we just don't have time to go into at the moment. But these questions will definitely inform, the way that this interest group is shaped, as will the people who pose the questions as well. So thank you very much for that. We do have to move on. I'm very sorry. So we're going to move on now to a 20-minute session facilitated by Nicola. Are you on the call, Nicola? Excellent. All right, I'm going to turn my camera off.
So hopefully you can all hear me. Yes, brilliant. And I will just share. So hopefully you can see. I'll be talking us through a little bit of discussion about the development of our charter, and the part of the charter that I'd like to talk about is the motivation for this, the development of this interest group. So something about the use cases and what we're hoping to achieve. And I guess the focus that I want to give to this discussion is what can we achieve in an RDA interest group around sensitive data that we couldn't achieve otherwise. So what are the problems that require input from multiple disciplines, multiple organisations, multiple stakeholder groups, multiple nationalities, so all the things that RDA brings to us. So our charter includes a set of the use cases that we were considering that really motivated us to bring this group together. So if you go to www.menti.com and enter this code, you'll be able to join along in some activities where we'd like to get some feedback about those use cases and your thoughts more generally around this. So hopefully everyone is able to visit that link. We'll see how we go. So, yes, as I was saying, we started off with a selection of use cases. I've summarised them quite briefly here. I don't know if many of you have had a chance to read our charter yet, but I'll elaborate a little, and hopefully you've got an activity where you can assign the relative importance of these use cases to you personally. So which of these things are really motivating you and your interest in this group? So we thought that it might be useful to be able to bring together people from multiple disciplines to provide sensitive data guidance that applies across multiple disciplines and allows possibly the use of data between disciplines. We thought that it may be useful to be able to have a combined consideration of both the, yes, thank you, the SD is sensitive data, otherwise we're not going to fit everything in. Combined consideration of both the technical factors that underlie our management of sensitive data, and then also the ethical and cultural factors that help to determine that. Brilliant. We can see some responses coming in. And now because everything's moving, I've lost my place, but brilliant. I think we're getting a sense of the relative importance of those use cases to you guys. And I think something so this will help us to consider how we develop this interest group going forward, but I think it's also useful to just think about how this reflects the particular audience that we have here. It's something that I'll give you a second to just finish doing this. Yeah, very interesting to see infrastructure solutions coming up on top there, and also an interest in the combination of technical and ethical and cultural factors. So I think it sounds like there is quite an interest in the technical infrastructure that underlies some of this stuff, as well as the that governance aspect. Brilliant. We'll move on. So I wonder whether there are any additional use cases that you would add to that list. So things that you think that we could get out of this particular format that weren't covered in that list. Ah, interesting. Sensitive spatial data from private land. While we wait for some additional use cases, would the person who entered that, would you like to speak a little more about it? No pressure if you prefer not to. Yeah, facilitating the flow of sensitive information between public and research sectors is really interesting, and I think that speaks to those different kinds of expectations and motivations and language between those different spheres, which can make things difficult. Oh, interesting. Sensitive data from PhD theses of different disciplines. Again, would the person who made that comment like to elaborate? You can feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'm RDM coordinator at a university in Germany, and we have a lot of PhD theses at our repository where people would like to share sensitive data, but at the moment, we don't really have technical solutions to do that, and we can only accept anonymized data, and that's frustrating for a lot of the students, of course. And so we try to point them to the repositories that are available, but some are, some just don't find a good home for their data, and so I'm really interested in the technical solutions that could be made available also at our university.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Oh, interesting. Looking at when non-sensitive data, when aggregated, becomes sensitive data. That's something that I hadn't considered.
Nicola, can we pick that one up? I'm very curious to see what our respondent means there, because I say conceptually it tends to work the other way around. So I'm curious about that particular case.
Yeah, would the person who entered that like to unmute themselves and talk a bit more?
Yes, it was from me, Romain. There are several cases that can happen from for instance, biodiversity data. When you have a species and you chose to allocate the species only on a department because it's or a region because it's not enough precise to find the species. If you cross this kind of data with another one, like another one, like context, climate context, and things like that, you can find the species and the location of the endangered species. It's the same thing in personal data. You know, when you are on Facebook, you like and unlike lots of things, and if you erase your profile because it's personal data, and you create another one with and you continue to like and unlike things, algorithms, deep learning algorithms will be able to find you again. So that means that if you cross personal medical data, you can find a profile that will show that it's you on no other person. There are lots of cases of relocalization or re-identification that are permitted by the big data approach. So I think that it's something that we have to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, is anything else coming up here that anyone would like to raise or discuss? Otherwise, I think this is fantastic input for the group to consider. So the last question that I wanted to ask was just a sense of who we have here. I know we have, you know, your names and organisations, but I thought it could be quite useful to get a sense of the different perspectives that the attendees today can bring to the group in terms of, and that could mean different things. So you might have several perspectives, you know, different disciplines. You might be different kinds of stakeholders. You know, different experiences. That can give us some more of that shared perspective. And yeah, don't feel like you need to put your name, but if you feel like you have something that you'd like to contribute and put your name against it, then go for that as well. Thanks, Steve. Excellent. So we're seeing research ethics. I'd be curious to know about people's disciplinary backgrounds, cool, providing advice and guidance and data repository preservation services, social sciences and GDPR. Yeah, I think GDPR is going to come up a lot. Yeah, sensitive data taxonomy. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting piece of work for the group, is talking about definitions of sensitive data and the types of sensitive data and how they interrelate. Oh, brilliant. A legal perspective is quite different to some of the other stuff we've been talking about. Bioinformatics. Fantastic. So I think that we have a really usefully diverse group here. Very exciting. So I thought that in the last 5 minutes, I would just open the floor to any other questions or comments that might have come up as we've talked. Failing that, any other discussion that anyone might want to have? Perhaps if, given there's quite a few of us, if anyone's interested in making a comment, if you could just type, I don't know, question into the chat and I can call on you. Something that I'm really interested in is what unifies all of the kinds of data that we refer to as sensitive data. And we have our working definition, and it's definitely an aim of the group to refine that definition. But I'd be quite curious to know if anyone has any perspectives. Okay, well, if everyone's feeling quiet, then maybe we'll move on to, here we go. Interesting. Someone somewhere cares deeply if that information is exposed, makes the data owner vulnerable to harm. Yes, I think that I often think about it in terms of risk, right? There's information that potentially harms people or animals. Yeah, commercially sensitive is interesting. So again, I think that you there's that element of risk, and I've been in some really interesting conversations where people have talked about, you know, it becomes possible to define almost any data as sensitive if you try hard enough. There are always risks involved or potential damages. But I think that we, at the same time, generally have a kind of a common sense view about what's sensitive and what's not. But I wonder if different people among us would have different intuitive senses about what is sensitive and what isn't. But yeah, I think it's fascinating that we're talking about a topic which includes things like biodiversity data and personal information and commercial in confidence data, and potentially. And I think what's really useful about a combined group like this is that while those are all domains which are quite disparate, there are, as Steve, I think, was saying in the Q&A, there are things that bring them together. So, you know, maybe solutions to shared problems like access or security of storage, which we all need, even though the particular types of data are quite different. Right, I might hand over to Steve now, I think. And he can talk to us about what next. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nicola. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just picking up. I'm just making some on-the-fly edits, which I'm prone to do, given the conversation. So my role is to figure out where to next, and sort of to lead a discussion on where we want to go from here. And we were going to try and pick up on some of the aims that, you know, intent of this group. And I think we've picked up quite a lot in terms of the sorts of things that people are interested in discussing. So I'm going to just do a quick edit where I'm also going to be picking up on a Mentimeter approach here. But I'm just going to quickly edit one of the questions I was going to ask, because I think drawing out of some of the discussion that we've already seen here, we get a pretty good sense of the sorts of things people are interested in. So I say, in terms of looking at where to next, I'm going to focus on, we have identified a set of objectives in the charter about what the group might be wanting to do, and I partly want to pick up on that and to say, all right, how important do you see those particular aims that we've identified? So, you know, assessment there, and then really looking at some of the outputs that we might be able to produce from there. I'm going to throw both of those questions at the group as well in a similar style that Nicola's done here. So I'm going to quickly turn to that as well as to where we go next. Let me get my screen up and running here. I'm going to just move something into presenting mode. Presenting mode here, and then I'm just going to share that with everyone. It's an interesting dynamic of trying to move through all of these systems there we are, to be able to get to the things we need. Okay, so which tab do I want there? So I'm on, looking at Menti. There is my, so as soon as I share my screen and my tabs, I lose the view of what I can see. So just confirming that everyone can see the screen here. I'm going to flick back and forth just to, yep, excellent. So I say, let's going back to Menti. I say we've got a second Menti code there now. And I'm going to just go back a slide to where I want to go first. So there's a code again, second code to put in, and I'd like you to see if say the first question we've got is how important are the different objectives? And I apologise for the small text, but this is, we have 10 objectives 10 that we're interested in from the charter, and to get them all on screen, that was the best I could do. One of my day jobs is working as a survey researcher, so this is not my ideal design, but what I'd like for people to do is see if you can get into responding to those questions up on the screen. So you can click on them up here, so it should pop up for you. You can rate them across the screen there. So, okay, just waiting for first bit to start coming in. Bingo. Righto. So we'll follow live on screen and start seeing how we go. One of the nice things I like about this tool is you get the results in real time. You can kind of see where things are headed. The fun part, as Nicola just sort of demonstrated there, is that you have to be able to respond to those in real time as well, and that's a bit of excitement from the point of view of the presenter. But it's a great tool for getting these sorts of interactions going. So we'll give it another minute just for people to make their way through. All right. We'll give another 30 seconds, and then I'll move to a follow-up there. Right now, we're seeing a fairly reasonable description. This is always a fun one for getting people to respond to a 5-point scale with. But I say it seems like across the board there we've got a fairly even distribution around the very important. Notably, the sort of the prominent example here, in particular, is the existing solutions for collection, analysis, and dissemination. So, kind of picking up on what Nicola was pointing out before. That one of the topics, and we've actually seen this in Nicola and I and a couple of colleagues convene an Australian sensitive data community of practice as well. and the sort of solutions and technologies is certainly a common discussion there. So a little bit, not too surprisingly from our point of view, seeing that as being one of the primary interests there is coming, certainly coming through. So as I say, nothing sticks out here particularly as being particularly problematic in terms of the objectives we identified in our charter. And if you do want to sort of highlight that a bit more, it seems like that we may be on the right track, certainly in terms of the objectives we've identified there. So let's say, that's one of the aims here is sort of, are we headed in the right direction is partly the question that I'm interested in from the sort of the where to next discussion. To follow on from that, let's say we've talked a bit about the sorts of use cases people are interested in, what are the topics they might be interested in discussing. So I guess where I want to follow on from there, we were going to see, are there any other aims that people might be interested in? But I've sort of adjusted slightly to go, all right, well, what would be some of the key outputs you might be interested in seeing? What are the sort of outputs we're seeing there, and that they're starting to come through as well. So we've got things like guidelines, recommendations, and use cases, standards for sensitive data handling, recommendation, harmonized documentation of consent. That's an interesting idea. So we've got insights, standards, use cases and solutions, recommendations. A big one there seems to be around anonymization. So there's probably a series of themes that I can kind of pick up on there as we go through. I'll let those sort of flow through a little bit more, and then perhaps try and summarize those on the fly. There is a word cloud option actually inside Menti, but it doesn't actually highlight the most regularly used themes. It just is presenting on screen words that are appearing, so we can't use it to determine more regularly used terminology. So we've got about 15 responses there already. I'll give it another minute as well for people to start feeding through, and certainly again we'll capture these at the end of the process and incorporate that into the notes as well. It does occur to me that in the process of doing this, I haven't asked for consent, and maybe that we're capturing sensitive data here. So we may have to do some retrospective consent, but I say we'll deal with that as and when the concern comes through. We have de-identified data at this point, certainly. All right, so sorts of themes: inclusive publication, technical solutions, or organizational solutions to handle sensitive data. I'll touch on that a little bit. Amy's started to point to some of the questions around some of the sensitive data solutions that are used in the domains that she and I both work in, the social sciences, but common practices that might exist there. Okay, so we'll close it off at this point, to say, but do feel free to add additional comments in the notes and like. So that some of the basic themes there, let's say, that are appearing on the screen. What are some of the lessons learnt? So it seems to be real life, practices and experiences, technical and and administrative solutions, anonymization. Is one of the themes that comes through, and some very interesting discussions around anonymization. I did want to pick that one up a little bit, because connecting what Roman was talking about in our previous speaker, he was talking about aggregation of content across all, in what we might also call data linkage. Some of the anonymization techniques that we have are no longer as reliable as we might otherwise. The de-identification methods that we use in the era of big data and much more publicly accessible data, we're actually able to leverage these external auxiliary sources to actually re-identify people that might otherwise previously have not been re-identified when that information wasn't available. So the changing dynamics of anonymization are really pretty interesting at the moment. There's very interesting work that was done by here at the University of Melbourne on re-identifying some content in the Australian case that has led to some changes in practice in Australia. Other topics that are there, as I say, it really does seem to be. I think we can draw out some of those, but technical solutions, best practice guidelines, particular tools and practices and experiences seem to be the themes there. I'll quickly flick over to the chat as well here. Nothing particular there. Principles from GDPR certainly is one that and I mean, the reason you say there's a number of Australians involved in the organising group here. It's been a pretty dynamic discussion. It sort of kickstarted some of the discussion here. Was some changing legislative arrangements actually happening in Australia, which has been inspiring some of our conversations here, and I think probably motivated us to sort of look more internationally as well at what was going on through some legislative change. Those legislative changes going before the Parliament. As we speak, I think Australia is going to end up with something not dissimilar to the GDPR in the near future, but there's also a better data access discussion around public data or government data that's going on as well. And that's probably going to be the first emphasis of that public data. I'd say, so I think that it's been particularly valuable to get your input there on the approaches and the sorts of aims and objectives that we might have here and the sorts of things you're looking to see from this group. The other questions we really have, and we might circulate for discussion to the group going forward, is just some logistics and what types of interactions and sort of operating principles we might want to use for things like organising discussions and working group meetings and things like that. How do people, are people wanting to work together? How do they want to work together? It becomes one of the interesting challenges when you've got a big international group like this. For the co-chair group, we've actually had the experience of trying to figure out, we're doing actually it's been weekly, but alternating time schedules to suit the international group that we have here. So that's, sort of the on-the-ground logistics of actually looking at bringing a sort of an international group like this together is probably the other part of the where to next discussion that we want to have going forward that that we're keen to return to. So that's kind of where we're heading, and and we appreciate the sort of input we've had here from the group. Is there any other sort of where to sorts of issues that people want to surface? If not, turn back to Crystal to wrap up our final steps in the session, and thank you for your participation.
Great, thanks so much, Steve. We've still, okay, cool. That's great, thank you. This has been so helpful. So yeah, like you would have heard at the beginning of the session, this is really only our second meeting. We met as birds of a feather, and now we're meeting as a proposed interest group. So all this input at this early stage is fantastic, and of course we'll keep it adapting and evolving as needed as well. I guess our first port of call now is to sort of digest, take on board everything. All the information you provided us with today, and work that into our charter. And I guess, we'll regroup, and then we'll be in contact via the contact details that have been put into the shared collaborative notes. I'm just going to pop those into the chat again. So if you've made it to the end of the session and thought, oh yeah, that sounds all right, I'd like to be involved, please do put your contact details into the table and the collaborative notes I just put into the chat, and we'll be in contact. When when we're ready for the next steps. So yeah, just like to thank you all again. So I guess the next thing to keep tuned for is the second draft of our charter, which is going to be circulated on our RDA interest group page. So do sign up to our interest group and then you'll receive our updates. Can't thank you enough again. Thank you so much. And we're done. I guess we've got 3 minutes and 27 seconds left. We can just sit around and chat. Or if it's 12:15 at night time, like it is in Australia, also please feel free to go to sleep.
Perhaps I think that it will be the time to precise a roadmap for the group with milestone. Until the next plenary, I think that we have lots of materials. So thanks for all the participants. You agree, Kristen?
Okay, I'm going to turn my camera off now. Thanks, everyone.